This story is called I Am Not Martin by R.L. Stein. The first thing I noticed about the hospital was the sick green walls, such a drab, dull color, almost gray, the color of the sky on a raw, stormy day. Someone had draped orange and black streamers from the ceiling because it was Halloween, and some of the doors had cardboard witches and jack o' lanterns taped to them. But the decorations didn't help. Even if you were feeling cheerful, the grim color of the walls would change your mood and make you feel sad and nervous and afraid. I sure wasn't feeling cheerful as I walked between my parents down the long green hall to my hospital room. Mom squeezed my hand. Her hand was very warm. Mine was cold and clammy. Nothing to worry about, Sean, she said. She stared straight ahead. Her shoes clicked on the hard tile floor. Under his breath, Dad read off the room numbers as we passed each green door. B12, B14, B16. Having your tonsils out is no big deal, Mom said. She'd already said it about 100 times. You'll have a sore throat for a few days, but then you'll be fine. Click, click, click. Mom's shoes echoed down the long hall like a ticking clock, a clock clicking away the seconds to my doom. But why do I have to have them out? I whined. I've grown attached to them. Mom and Dad laughed. I can always make them laugh. It's a talent that comes in handy whenever they're angry at me. Of course, they weren't angry today, but I always make jokes when I'm nervous. Just think. No more of those horrible sore throats every time you catch a cold, Dad said, his eyes on the door numbers. No more swollen glands. Whoop-de-doo, I muttered. None of my friends have ever had their tonsils out. How come I have to have mine out, and on Halloween? Just lucky, Dad said. He's a big joker, too. But Halloween is my favorite holiday, I said. I love scaring people and getting scared. And now I'm missing it all. I had no way of knowing that this would turn into my scariest Halloween ever. As we turned a corner, I heard a kid sobbing loudly. Mom sighed. There are so many sick kids in this hospital, Sean. Really sick kids. You should remember how lucky you are. So many kids have serious trouble. A few seconds later, we met a kid with serious trouble. His name was Martin Charles. I read his name on top of the chart that hung from the foot of his bed. I saw Martin as we stood in the open doorway of room B22. Martin's bed was by the window. An empty bed, my bed, stood across from it against the puke green wall. I stared at my new roommate. He was short and had dark eyes and very short brown hair. He sat on the edge of his bed, swinging his legs, glaring at two uniformed nurses. I'm not Martin, he shouted. One of the nurses held a needle in one hand. The other nurses struggled with the sleeve of Martin's green hospital gown. Martin, please, she pleaded. I'm not Martin, he said again. He jerked his arm out of the nurse's grip. She gave a startled cry and stepped back. Martin, we just need a blood sample, the other nurse said. I'm not Martin. I'm not Martin, he screamed, pounding the bed with both fists. Yes, yes, we both heard that before, the nurse grumbled. Then she turned and saw us standing in the doorway. She lowered the needle and took a step toward us. Are you Sean Daly? She asked. I nodded. That's your bed over there, Sean, the nurse said. How does your throat feel? It's kind of sore, I confessed. It hurts every time I swallow. She smiled at my parents. Why don't you take Sean's things over there? You can unpack. Use the closet near the bed. I followed my parents across the room. What's that guy's problem? I asked. Mom raised a finger to her lips. Shh. He seems to be very frightened. I wanted to see what they did to him, but one of the nurses pulled the curtain between the beds. The sound was muffled now, but as I unpacked my bed, I could still hear him protesting. I'm not Martin. Leave me alone. I'm not Martin. A few minutes later, the curtain slid open a few feet, and one of the nurses stepped to our side of the room. She shook her head. Poor guy, she said softly. What's wrong with him? I asked. The nurse handed me a green hospital gown. Martin is having major surgery tomorrow morning, she said, glancing toward the curtain. He's so terrified, I think he has convinced himself that he's someone else. You mean, I started. She pulled back the covers of my bed. The poor guy has been trying to trick us ever since he arrived in the hospital. He's been insisting that he's not Martin. He wants us to think we have the wrong kid. That's terrible, Mom said sadly, shaking her head. He thinks if he can convince us that he's not Martin, he won't have to have the operation tomorrow. Are you sure you have the right kid? Dad asked. The nurse nodded solemnly. Yes, we're sure. He's Martin Charles, no matter how many times he says he isn't. What kind of operation does he need? I asked her. She brought her face close to my ear and whispered, He has to have his left foot removed. Doctors and nurses were in and out of the room all afternoon. They explained for the 100th time about how a tonsillectomy works and told me about what to expect. Mom and Dad stayed until dinner time. It was kind of hard to come up with things to talk about. I couldn't stop thinking about Martin. Just the thought of having a foot cut off made my feet itch like crazy and my stomach clench into a tight knot. No wonder he's been so terrified. After dinner, it grew very quiet. I could hear a baby crying far down the hall. I heard phones ringing and nurses talking quietly outside the door. I tried to be brave, but it felt really alone without Mom and Dad. It's Halloween, I thought. I shouldn't be here. I started to picture ghosts and mummies and vampires floating silently down the hospital halls. I picked up a book and tried to read, but I couldn't concentrate. I was alert to every hospital sound. I heard carts rattle down the hall, whispered voices, the eerie bleep, bleep, bleep of some kind of machine. I shut the book. I can't read. I have to talk to someone, I decided. I took a deep breath, pulled open the curtain, and said hi to my roommate. I'm Sean Daly, I said. I'm having my tonsils out tomorrow. He was sitting up in bed, reading a comic book. He turned the page and stared at me. He had orange spaghetti stains on his chin from dinner. You're Martin, right? I said softly. He opened his mouth and shouted, I'm not Martin. Oh, sorry, I jumped back. Why am I such a stupid jerk? I said to myself. Why did I say that? I sat on the edge of my bed. The hospital gown rolled up way over my knee. I tugged it down. I couldn't get used to wearing the stupid thing. You into comic books? I asked. Not really, he said. He tossed the comic book on the floor. Martin is into comic books, but I'm not. Oh, I swallowed. This guy is definitely weird, I thought. I couldn't help it. I kept glancing at his feet, but they were under the bed sheet. I couldn't see anything. Where do you go to school? I asked. I don't go to Martin's school, he said, eyeing me strangely. I go to a different school. Creepy. I wish I hadn't started talking to him, but it was too late. Where? I asked. Middle Valley, he said. It's not bad. He stopped staring at me and started to relax. We talked about our schools and our brothers and sisters, and we talked about movies and sports. And we talked about how we were missing Halloween, cooped up in this horrible hospital. That got us started on what kind of candy we liked. We were still talking when a nurse walked in at 10 o'clock. It's your last chance for a glass of water, Martin, she said. He pounded his fist on the bed. I'm not Martin, he cried. I'm not having surgery. Please, the nurse frowned at him. Enough of that, okay, Martin? I'm not Martin. I'm not Martin. Whatever. She rolled her eyes. She turned to me. How about you, Sean? No, thanks, I said quietly. She said goodnight and strode out of the room. I listened to her footsteps down the hall. Then I turned back to Martin. I found him staring at me intently. Are you a sound sleeper? He asked. Excuse me? His question took me by surprise. Are you a sound sleeper or are you a light sleeper? He demanded. Uh, a sound sleeper, I guess. He studied me for another moment. Then he grabbed the curtain and pulled it shut. I'm tired now, he said coldly. I didn't think I'd ever get to sleep. Nurses were talking out in the hall, and I heard a girl coughing and coughing in a room nearby. But to my surprise, I drifted quickly into a deep sleep. I had a lot of strange dreams. In one dream, I was being chased down a long green hall by someone I couldn't see. In another dream, my dog was bigger than me. He carried me around in his teeth. Then I turned into a grinning jack-o'-lantern and rolled away. But in my most vivid dream, I was in the hospital. I saw a boy at the foot of my bed. He held two clipboards with charts in his hand. I could read the name on top of only one chart, Martin Charles. The boy hung that chart on my hospital bed. Then, smiling, he crept away carrying the other chart under his arm. When I awoke, I wasn't sure if it was still a dream or not. Two men in white lab coats stood beside my bed. They wheeled a long cart up to me. One of them picked up the chart from the end of my bed. This is him, he told his partner. Huh? I gazed up at them, still half asleep. What is happening? I wondered. They picked me up gently and slid me onto the cart. Easy does it, Martin, one of them said, untangling my arm from the bed sheet. No, wait, I choked out. I tried to sit up. I'm not Martin. One of them held me down. The other checked the chart again, reading the name out loud. Martin Charles. Let's go, his partner said. They wheeled me to the door. No, stop, I screamed. I'm not Martin. Really, you're making a big mistake. He's Martin. I pointed back to the room. They pushed the cart down the empty hall. The wheels clattered loudly over the tile. They warned us you'd say that, the taller one said. They said you'd been lying about your name since you arrived. They told us to ignore you, his partner added. But I'm not Martin, I screamed at the top of my lungs. Please, you've got to listen. I'm not Martin. I'm not Martin. I'm not Martin. They pushed the cart into the open elevator. Way down the hall, Martin poked his head out of the room. He waved goodbye, a big grin on his face. Then the elevator doors shut behind me. The end.